Commander Vexthal stood on the bridge of his warship, watching the stars through the massive viewing window. His 6 arms moved across the control panels with practiced ease. The Zephyrian Empire had been winning this war for 20 years, and today would be no different. "Sir, we have new intelligence about the resistance forces," his aide reported, approaching with a data tablet. Vexthal took the tablet with one of his lower arms while his upper hands continued working. His large black eyes scanned the information quickly. Another species had joined the desperate coalition fighting against the Empire. The report made him laugh, a harsh clicking sound. "Humans," he said, showing the data to his officers. "Look at this. They have no natural armor, no claws, no poison glands. They can't even see in the dark properly. What do these creatures think they can do against us?" His bridge crew joined in the laughter. The war had been easy lately. Most species surrendered quickly once they saw the Empire's power. Those that didn't surrender usually fled to the outer systems, where they caused minor problems before being crushed. "The report says they reproduce slowly and live short lives," another officer added. "They're probably just throwing bodies at us because they have nothing else left." Vexthal handed back the tablet. "Update our battle plans. Treat them like any other weak species. Use standard suppression tactics. This should be over quickly." 3 days later, Vexthal's fleet reached Kepler Station, a small mining outpost on the edge of resistance space. The station was old and poorly defended, perfect for testing these new humans in battle. Intelligence said a mixed group of resistance fighters was hiding there, including some of these soft-skinned newcomers. Vexthal decided to lead the ground assault himself. It had been too long since he'd seen real combat, and this would be an easy victory to add to his record. He chose his best soldiers and prepared to land. The station's outer defenses fell within an hour. Vexthal's forces moved through the corridors systematically, clearing each section. The few resistance fighters they found were the usual mix: scaled Fortakians, armored Kellists, and some insectoid Threx warriors. They fought hard but predictably, using standard tactics that Vexthal had countered thousands of times. Then his scanner detected a lone life form in Storage Bay 7. The readings showed it was injured and moving slowly. Vexthal signaled his squad to wait outside while he went in alone. This would be a quick execution, nothing more. The bay was dark except for emergency lighting. Containers and machinery cast long shadows everywhere. Vexthal activated his thermal vision and saw the figure crouched behind a metal crate about 30 meters away. The heat signature matched the human profile from the intelligence reports. "Come out," Vexthal called, his voice amplified by his helmet speakers. "You're surrounded. Make this easy for both of us." No response. The figure didn't move. Vexthal walked forward slowly, his plasma rifle ready. He'd killed hundreds of enemies in situations like this. They always either ran in panic or begged for mercy. Sometimes they tried a desperate, clumsy attack that was easy to counter. As he got closer, he could see more details. The human was definitely injured. Dark liquid stained its primitive clothing. It was smaller than him, which wasn't surprising, since most species were. What did surprise him was that it wasn't shaking with fear or trying to hide better. "Last warning," Vexthal said, now only 10 meters away. The human stood up. Vexthal got his first clear look at one of these creatures. It was indeed small and looked incredibly fragile. Its skin was pale and soft-looking, with no visible armor or natural weapons. Hair covered the top of its head, but nowhere else that he could see. 2 arms, 2 legs, just like the report said. Its eyes were smaller than his, but focused directly on him without looking away. "I'm Sergeant Maria Santos, Earth Defense Force," the human said in clear galactic standard. "And you're on the wrong side of this war." Vexthal almost laughed again. The creature was making threats. "Surrender now and your death will be quick," he replied, raising his rifle. Instead of dropping to its knees or running, the human did. Something unexpected. It smiled. "Quick?" Santos said, blood running down one side of her face. "Sorry, but I don't do quick." She moved. Vexthal had fought many different species and considered himself an expert on alien combat styles. Vortakians relied on their thick scales and brute strength. Kellists used their natural armor and fought defensively. Threx warriors attacked in coordinated swarms with their blade arms. This human fought like nothing he'd ever seen. Santos didn't charge straight at him or try to run away. Instead, she dove sideways behind another container just as Vexthal fired. The plasma bolt missed, and suddenly she was throwing something at him. Not a weapon, but a heavy tool that forced him to dodge. Before he could aim again, she was moving to new cover, using the maze of containers and machinery like they were old friends. Every time he thought he had a clear shot, she was somewhere else, and more improvised projectiles came flying at him from unexpected angles. "Stand still and fight properly," Vexthal shouted, frustrated. This wasn't how combat was supposed to work. "You first," came the reply from his left. No, his right. How was she moving so quietly? Vexthal spun around and saw her sprinting between two large machines. He fired 3 quick shots, but she seemed to predict where he would aim and moved accordingly. One blast came close enough to singe her clothing, but she kept going. Then she disappeared completely. Vexthal stood in the center of the bay, turning slowly with his rifle ready. His thermal vision showed nothing. His motion detectors were silent. Where had she gone? A small sound behind him made him spin around. Santos was there, less than 5 meters away, holding something in her hands. Not a gun, some kind of cutting torch she'd found somewhere. "Surprise," she said. She attacked before he could react. The torch wasn't designed as a weapon, but she used it like one, forcing him to back away from the bright flame and superheated metal tip. At the same time, she kicked at his legs, trying to knock him off balance. Vexthal had trained in hand-to-hand combat for years. He was stronger, taller, and had more arms than this human. But somehow she was winning. Santos fought like the storage bay was her home, and he was the invader. She used every piece of equipment as a weapon or shield. When he tried to grab her with his multiple arms, she slipped away like water. When he cornered her, she found ways to escape that he hadn't even considered. Worse, she was learning from every exchange. Each time he tried the same attack, she countered it better than before. She seemed to understand his fighting style faster than he could understand hers. The cutting torch caught the side of his armor, burning through the outer layer. Vexthal roared in pain and anger, swinging all 4 arms at once. Santos dropped under the attack and swept his legs with hers, actually managing to trip him. As Vexthal fell, she grabbed his rifle. "Squad leader to ground team," his radio crackled. "Status report. We heard weapons fire." Santos looked at the rifle in her hands, then at Vexthal struggling to get up. She could have killed him right then. He expected her to. Instead, she threw the rifle across the room and ran for the exit. "Tell your friends," she called back as she disappeared into the corridor, "that humans don't surrender, ever." Vexthal lay on the floor, bleeding and confused. His squad found him there 10 minutes later, along with burn marks on his armor and his pride in pieces. For the first time in his military career, Commander Vexthal had been beaten in single combat by what everyone said was an inferior opponent. He couldn't stop thinking about the human's words. "You're on the wrong side of this war." As his medics treated his wounds, Vexthal realized something that would change everything. Maybe, just maybe, the Empire had made a serious mistake about these humans. 2 weeks after the fight at Kepler Station, Vexthal sat in his private quarters, staring at screens full of data. His wounds had healed, but his confusion had only grown stronger. The official report said he'd been ambushed by multiple enemies and fought his way out heroically. Only he knew the truth. One injured human had defeated him. The ship's database contained files about every species in the known galaxy. Vexthal had read the human section dozens of times, but it still didn't make sense. According to the data, humans should be easy to beat. They were weaker than Vortakians, slower than Kellists, and had no natural weapons like the Threx. Yet somehow, that human soldier had fought better than any of them. "Computer, show me all recorded human combat encounters from the last 6 months, Vexthal commanded. The screen filled with battle reports. At first glance, they seemed normal. Human forces had won some fights and lost others, just like any other species. But as Vexthal studied the details, patterns began to emerge. In every battle where humans were outnumbered 3-1 or more, they fought harder, not softer. When their positions became hopeless, they didn't retreat. They got more dangerous. Most strange of all, human soldiers often died protecting other species, even ones they'd never met before. This makes no sense, Vexthal muttered. He opened a communication channel to the prison level. Bring me a human prisoner for questioning. An hour later, guards escorted a human male into Vexthal's office. The prisoner was tall for his species, with dark skin and graying hair. His uniform bore the markings of a resistance officer, but more importantly, his file said he'd fought against the Empire for over 10 years. Sit, Vexthal ordered, gesturing to a chair with one of his arms. The human, Colonel James Mitchell, according to his file, remained standing. I'll stand, thanks. You're a prisoner, you'll do what I say. Mitchell looked directly at Vexthal with those small but intense human eyes. Make me. This was exactly what confused Vexthal. Any other prisoner would have been trying to appear cooperative, hoping for better treatment. But humans seemed incapable of acting defeated even when they clearly were. Fine. Stand if you want. Vexthal activated his recording device. I have questions about human military tactics. I'm not telling you anything that helps you kill my people. I could torture you. You could try. Mitchell's voice was calm, like he was discussing the weather. Won't work, though. Humans have a pretty high pain tolerance. Vexthal leaned back in his chair. Why do you fight battles you can't win? Who says we can't win? Mathematics. Logic. You're outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your average soldier is physically weaker than our weakest civilian. Mitchell smiled, the same expression Santos had worn before their fight. You know what your problem is? You think war is about math. Isn't it? Superior numbers, better weapons, stronger soldiers, these things determine victory. Sometimes, but not always. Mitchell moved closer to the desk. Can I tell you a story? Vexthal was curious despite himself. Proceed. 300 years ago, my people fought a war called World War II. A group called the Nazis tried to conquer our planet. They had better technology, more soldiers, and conquered most of Europe in just 2 years. They won. They lost. Completely. Mitchell's eyes got that strange human intensity again. You want to know why? Because they made the same mistake you're making. They thought being stronger meant they deserved to win. Vexthal's 4 hands moved restlessly. If they were stronger, why didn't they win? Because strength isn't just about weapons and numbers. It's about why you're fighting. The Nazis fought to conquer and control. The rest of us fought to survive and protect our families. When you're fighting for something bigger than yourself, you don't give up. That's illogical. Dead soldiers can't protect anyone. Mitchell laughed, a sound that seemed to contain both humor and sadness. That's where you're wrong. Dead soldiers inspire living ones. When we see someone sacrifice themselves for others, it makes the rest of us fight harder. This made Vexthal's head hurt. Zephyrian military doctrine was based on logical calculations, force ratios, casualty exchanges, resource costs. The idea that deaths could somehow make an army stronger contradicted everything he'd been taught. Show me something, Vexthal said, calling up a holographic display. This is footage from the Battle of Rigel 7, where your forces held out for 3 weeks against impossible odds. Explain your tactics. Mitchell watched the display for several minutes, his expression growing sad. I was there. Lost a lot. Of good people. He pointed to one section of the battlefield. See that hill? That's where Sergeant Peterson held off an entire battalion for 6 hours. He was just one man with a broken rifle and a handful of grenades. One soldier against a battalion is suicide. Yeah, it was. He knew he was going to die. Mitchell's voice got quieter. But those 6 hours let us evacuate 2,000 civilians. Peterson saved more lives by dying than he ever could have by living. Vextal stared at the tactical display. You're saying he chose to die? He chose to matter. There's a difference. The door chimed, and Vextal's aide entered. Sir, you're needed on the bridge. We've received new orders. Vextal dismissed Mitchell and made his way to the bridge. The new orders were simple. His fleet was to attack a human refugee convoy. Intelligence said it was lightly defended and carrying thousands of non-combatants fleeing the war zone. Easy target, his tactical officer reported. 3 escort ships and maybe 50 fighters protecting about 20 transport vessels. Estimated resistance? Minimal. The escorts are old models and the fighters are obsolete. We could destroy the entire convoy in less than an hour. Vextal studied the tactical analysis. By every logical measure, this would be a simple operation. The human ships couldn't possibly stop his fleet. But something about Mitchell's words bothered him. Sir? His aide asked. Your orders? Vextal looked at the display showing the convoy's position. Thousands of human civilians, including children, fleeing for their lives. By military logic, destroying them would weaken human morale and reduce their future recruitment potential. But he kept thinking about Sergeant Peterson, who chose to die saving strangers. Prepare for attack, Vextal ordered finally. But I want prisoners taken for interrogation. Specifically, I want to question their military commanders. The attack went exactly as predicted. The human escorts fought desperately but were overwhelmed quickly. What surprised Vextal was how they fought. Instead of trying to save themselves, each escort ship positioned itself to protect as many transports as possible. The fighters didn't flee when the battle became hopeless. They kept attacking even as they were shot down. Most shocking of all, the transport ships didn't surrender even when they were defenseless. Their captains kept trying to escape, carrying their passengers away from the battle until the very last moment. When it was over, Vextal had destroyed the convoy, but he felt strangely unsatisfied. He'd won the battle using superior firepower, exactly as military doctrine dictated. So why did it feel like the humans had somehow won something too? In the prisoner interrogations that followed, Vextal learned more disturbing things. The transport captains weren't even military. They were civilian volunteers who had risked their lives to help strangers. The escort crews knew they couldn't win, but fought anyway because protecting others was more important than surviving. That night, Vextal accessed the Empire's historical databases. He searched for any previous enemy that had shown similar behavior. The results were troubling. Every species that had fought this way had eventually defeated their conquerors, even when facing overwhelming odds. The Catherian resistance against the ancient Mordak Empire, the Stellan uprising against the hegemony, the Andromedan Revolution. In each case, the weaker force had ultimately won through sheer determination and willingness to sacrifice for others. Vextal realized that the Empire had never faced an enemy like humans before. Most species fought for territory, resources, or survival, but humans seemed to fight for ideas, abstract concepts like freedom and justice that couldn't be conquered or destroyed. As he prepared his report for High Command, Vextal made a decision that would change his life. Instead of writing the standard victory report, he included a warning. Recommend immediate strategic reassessment of human threat level, he wrote. Current tactics may be insufficient for this enemy. He sent the report and settled back in his chair, staring out at the stars. For the first time in his career, Commander Vextal wasn't sure his side was going to win this war, and for reasons he couldn't explain, that thought didn't frighten him as much as it should have. Vextal's warning about human tactical capabilities was dismissed by High Command. The commander appears to be overthinking a simple problem, came the reply. Continue standard suppression operations. But Vextal couldn't stop thinking about humans. Over the next 3 months, he requested assignment to every operation involving human forces. Each battle taught him something new about how they fought, and each lesson made him more uncomfortable with his own tactics. At the Battle of New Geneva, he watched human engineers blow up their own supply depot rather than let it fall into Empire hands. But they didn't just destroy it, They turned the explosion into a trap that took out half his advance guard. During the siege of Port Victoria, human defenders ran out of ammunition on the third day. Instead of surrendering, they started, using farming tools and kitchen knives as weapons. When those broke, they fought with their bare hands. Vexthal's forces eventually won, but the cost was 10 times higher than predicted. The most disturbing encounter happened at a small research station called Hope's End. Intelligence said it contained important resistance data and was defended by only 20 human soldiers. Vexthal brought 200 troops for what should have been a quick raid. The humans didn't try to hold the station. Instead, they led his forces into a running battle through the nearby asteroid field, using the rocky terrain to negate his numerical advantage. For 6 hours, 20 humans kept 200 Zephyrians busy, picking them off in small groups and disappearing like ghosts. When it was over, Vexthal had lost 40 soldiers, and the humans had destroyed all the research data. Worse, he realized, they had never intended to win the fight. They had sacrificed themselves just to buy time for the data to be erased. "Sir," his tactical officer said as they regrouped, "the humans are clearly using some kind of advanced training program. Should we request intelligence analysis of their military academies?" Vexthal was beginning to suspect the truth was more complicated. "Send me all available data on human history and culture. Everything." What he found in the cultural databases changed his understanding of warfare completely. Humans, it turned out, had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. Not just for resources or territory, but for ideas, beliefs, and principles. They had wars about religion, politics, and philosophy. They fought over concepts that other species couldn't even understand. More importantly, they had turned fighting into an art form. Human military history was filled with impossible victories won through creativity, determination, and sheer refusal to accept defeat. At a place called Thermopylae, 300 soldiers had held off an army of thousands. At somewhere called Stalingrad, an entire city had refused to surrender despite being surrounded and bombed into ruins. The more Vexthal read, the more he realized that humans didn't just fight wars. They studied them. Every battle was analyzed, every tactic was improved, every failure was turned into a lesson. They had been perfecting the art of combat for thousands of years, not through biological evolution, but through constant learning. "Computer," Vexthal said one night, "analyze human tactical patterns and create a predictive model." Unable to complete analysis, the computer replied, "Human tactical patterns do not follow consistent logical parameters." Explain. Human forces frequently make decisions that contradict optimal tactical doctrine. They choose to fight when retreat would be more beneficial. They sacrifice valuable resources to protect non-essential personnel. They pursue objectives that provide no strategic advantage. Vexthal stared at the screen. "And yet they keep winning battles they should lose." Affirmative. Human victory rates exceed mathematical projections by approximately 40%. This was the insight that changed everything for Vexthal. Humans didn't fight logically. They fought emotionally. They made decisions based on feelings like honor, duty, and compassion, rather than cold calculations. And somehow, this made them more effective, not less. He decided to test this theory during the next engagement. The opportunity came at Meridian Colony, where resistance forces had established a hidden base. Vexthal's intelligence indicated strong human presence along with mixed alien units. Instead of using his usual overwhelming assault tactics, he tried something different. He studied the human approach to warfare and adapted it for his own forces. Instead of a frontal attack, he used deception and misdirection. Instead of relying on superior firepower, he focused on mobility and surprise. Most importantly, instead of treating his soldiers as expendable resources, he started making decisions based on protecting their lives. The results were startling. His casualties dropped by 60% while his success rate actually improved. His troops, no longer expecting to be thrown away in pointless charges, began fighting with more creativity and initiative. But the real test came when he encountered Sergeant Santos again. She was leading a strike team trying to destroy a communications relay that Vexthal was defending. When his sensors detected the approaching humans, he felt something he'd never experienced before: anticipation rather than dread. This time, he was ready for human tactics. When Santos and her team used the maintenance tunnels to approach unseen, Vexthal had already positioned troops to counter that move. When they tried to split his forces with diversionary attacks, he was prepared for that too. For the first time in months, Vexthal felt like he was fighting an equal opponent rather than chasing ghosts. The battle lasted for 3 hours and covered 6 levels of the space station. Santos adapted to his new tactics just as quickly as he had learned hers, turning the engagement into a deadly game of chess played with real lives. Finally, they faced each other again in a cargo bay similar to the one where they'd first fought. But this time, both were uninjured and fully armed. "You've been studying us," Santos said, her weapon trained on him. "You noticed. Hard to miss. Your tactics have gotten a lot better." She smiled, that dangerous human smile. "But you're still missing something important." "What?" "You're fighting to win. We're fighting for something bigger than winning." Before Vexthal could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the station. His tactical display showed multiple breaches in the outer hull. Santos's team had completed their real mission while he was distracted by the fight. "The communications relay?" he asked. "Already destroyed?" "This whole thing was just to keep you busy while my demo expert did the real work." Vexthal realized he'd been outmaneuvered again, but this time he wasn't frustrated. Instead, he felt something like respect. "You sacrificed your entire team for one relay station," he said. "No," Santos replied, backing toward an escape pod. "I trusted my team to do their jobs while I did mine. There's a difference." She paused at the pod entrance. "You're learning, Commander. But until you understand what you're really fighting for, you'll never fight like we do." The escape pod launched, leaving Vexthal alone with his thoughts and a destroyed communications relay. That night, as he wrote his report, Vexthal found himself thinking about Santos's words. What was he fighting for? The glory of the Empire? His own career advancement? Orders from superiors who had never faced human forces? For the first time since the war began, he wasn't sure he knew the answer. He sealed his report and sent it to High Command, but he also did something else. He opened a secure communication channel and sent a brief message to an address he'd found in captured resistance communications. To Sergeant Maria Santos, he wrote, "You said I don't understand what I'm fighting for. Perhaps you could help me learn." He hesitated for a long moment before hitting send. Once that message went out, there would be no taking it back. He would be a traitor to his own empire. But as he thought about all the human soldiers he'd seen die for their beliefs, Vexthal realized that some things might be worth betraying an empire for. He sent the message and waited to see what would happen next. 3 days passed before Santos responded to Vexthal's message. When it came, the reply was simple: coordinates to a small moon in a neutral system, and a time. Vexthal knew he was walking into a trap, but he went anyway. He took a small scout ship and told his crew he was conducting a reconnaissance mission. The lie came easily. Too easily for someone who had always prided himself on following orders without question. The meeting place was an abandoned mining station orbiting a dead world. As Vexthal docked his ship, he wondered if he was about to be captured or killed. Either way, he had to know what Santos meant about fighting for something bigger than victory. She was waiting for him in the station's old control room, along with 2 other humans he didn't recognize. All 3 were armed, but their weapons weren't drawn. "Wasn't sure you'd actually come," Santos said. "Neither was I." Vexthal kept his 4 hands visible and away from his own weapons. "You could have killed me a dozen times by now." "Could have. Won't, though. Not unless you give me a reason." Santos gestured to a chair. "Sit. We need to talk." This time, Vexthal sat. "You said you wanted to understand what we're fighting for," Santos continued. "But first, I need to understand something about you. Why did you really send that message?" Vexthal had been thinking about that question for days. "Because every time I fight your people, I learn something that contradicts everything I was taught about warfare. You make decisions that should be stupid, but they work. You sacrifice things that should be precious, but you gain something more valuable. I need to understand how. One of the other humans, a woman with graying hair and the bearing of a senior officer, spoke up. What's your empire fighting for, Commander? Expansion, security, the natural order of the strong ruling the weak. And you personally? What do you get out of conquering the galaxy? Vexthal hesitated. Advancement, honor, the satisfaction of serving something greater than myself. But not choice, Santos said. You don't get to choose what you serve, do you? Choice is not relevant. We serve the Empire because the Empire is strong. The third human, a young man who looked barely old enough to be a soldier, laughed bitterly. Sounds familiar. That's what the hegemony told my planet before they enslaved it. Your planet was conquered by the hegemony? Vexthal asked. 70 years ago. My grandparents lived their whole lives in work camps, mining metals for ships they'd never see. The young man's eyes burned with quiet fury. The hegemony was strong too, right up until the day it wasn't. Santos leaned forward. That's what we're fighting for, Commander. The right to choose our own destiny. The right to live free from someone else's definition of natural order. But your losses are acceptable because we chose them. The older woman spoke again. Every human in this war volunteered. We're not fighting because someone ordered us to. We're fighting because we decided that freedom is worth dying for. Vexthal's mind raced. You could surrender, accept imperial rule. Your people would live as slaves, Santos said flatly. That's not living. That's just existing. I don't understand the difference. Santos stood and walked to a window overlooking the dead world below. See that planet? Used to be called Haven. 2 million Kellists lived there before your empire decided it needed their resources. The Kellists resisted imperial authority. They were relocated for their own safety. They were worked to death in labor camps. Santos's voice was ice cold. The entire species is extinct now, but hey, the empire got its medals, so I guess that's what matters. Vexthal felt something uncomfortable in his chest, a sensation he'd never experienced before. That was regrettable, but necessary for the greater good. Whose greater good? The young man demanded. Yours, not theirs. The empire brings order, stability, progress. The empire brings death, Santos interrupted, turning back to face him. And the only progress it makes is in finding new ways to kill people who won't kneel. The uncomfortable feeling in Vexthal's chest was getting stronger. He tried to push it away by focusing on facts. The empire has lasted for 800 years. It has brought peace to thousands of worlds. Peace? The older woman pulled out a data pad and showed him images that made his stomach lurch. Destroyed cities, burned forests, mass graves. This is your peace, Commander. This is what happens when the empire brings order to a world. Vexthal stared at the images. He recognized some of the locations, worlds he had helped conquer. At the time, he had seen only tactical objectives and casualty reports. He had never looked at the aftermath. Every war has casualties, he said weakly. These aren't casualties, Santos said, her voice deadly quiet. These are executions, genocides, the systematic murder of anyone who believes in something your empire doesn't approve of. The uncomfortable feeling was becoming painful now. Vexthal realized it was something he'd heard about but never experienced. Guilt. I was following orders, he said. So was everyone who carried out these killings. The young man showed him more images. My planet looked like this when the hegemony was done with it. My family looked like this. Vexthal couldn't look at the images anymore. Stop. Why? 2. Hard to see? Imagine how hard it was to live through. I said stop. Vexthal's voice echoed through the empty station. Silence fell. When Santos spoke again, her voice was gentler but no less firm. This is what we're fighting against, Commander. Not your ships or your soldiers, but what your empire represents. The idea that might makes right. The belief that some people deserve freedom while others deserve chains. Vexthal's four hands shook as he tried to process what he was feeling. Everything he had believed, everything he had fought for, everything he had built his life around, it was all based on a lie. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. "The same thing we want for everyone," Santos said. "A choice. You can go back to your ship and pretend this conversation never happened. Keep following orders, keep conquering worlds, keep telling yourself it's for the greater good. Or you can decide that some things are more important than following orders. That freedom is worth fighting for even when the odds are impossible." Vexthal looked around the room at the three humans. They had risked their lives just to give him a choice, something no one in the Empire had ever offered him. "If I join you," he said slowly, "what happens to my crew? My soldiers? They're just following orders too." "That depends," the older woman said. "How many of them do you think would make the same choice you're making if they had all the facts?" Vexthal thought about his officers, his troops, the thousands of Zephyrians serving under his command. How many of them had ever questioned their orders? How many had ever been given the chance to? "I don't know," he admitted. "Then maybe it's time to find out," Santos said. Before Vexthal could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. His ship's automated systems were detecting incoming vessels, Empire ships moving fast. "You were followed," the young man said, checking a scanner. "No, I made sure—" Vexthal stopped. Of course he'd been followed. The Empire didn't trust anyone completely, especially commanders who had been acting strangely. 3 cruisers and a dreadnought, Santos reported. "They'll be here in 20 minutes. "I have to go back," Vexthal said, standing quickly. "If I'm not on my ship when they arrive, they'll know I've turned traitor. And if you go back, they'll interrogate you until they find out about this meeting," the older woman pointed out. Vexthal realized the trap he'd walked into, not one set by the humans but by his own Empire's paranoia. In trying to understand his enemies, he had become one. "There's a third option," Santos said quietly. "What?" "Help us fight them. Right here. Right now. Show your Empire what happens when someone chooses freedom over orders." Vexthal looked at his hands that had killed thousands in service to an Empire that saw its own soldiers as expendable tools. Then he looked at the humans, who had risked everything just to offer him a choice. For the first time in his life, Commander Vexthal made a decision based on what he believed was right, rather than what he'd been ordered to do. "Tell me what you need," he said. The battle for the mining station lasted 18 hours and changed the course of the war. Vexthal's decision to help the humans had given them something they'd never had before: detailed knowledge of Empire tactics and technology. His ship's weapon systems, combined with human creativity and determination, proved to be a deadly combination. But more importantly, his choice inspired something neither side had expected. "Commander," came a voice over his ship's communication system as the battle raged. "This is Lieutenant Krathek from the cruiser Domination. We've been monitoring your transmissions." Vexthal's blood ran cold. His former subordinate had discovered his betrayal. "Lieutenant, return to your duties immediately. That's an order." "With respect, sir, I'm not taking orders from the Empire anymore." The words hit Vexthal like a physical blow. "Krathek? What are you saying?" "I'm saying you were right, Commander. I've been thinking about what we've been doing out here, and I can't do it anymore. Neither can most of my crew." Santos, monitoring the communications from the station, looked at Vexthal with something like amazement. "You didn't just defect, you started a mutiny." Over the next several hours, 2 more Empire ships broke formation and joined the growing rebellion. Crews that had followed orders without question for years suddenly found themselves unable to continue fighting for a cause they no longer believed in. The remaining Empire forces, confused and demoralized by defections from their own ranks, began to retreat. The Dreadnought's captain sent one final transmission before jumping to hyperspace. "This isn't over, traitor. The Empire will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy." When the battle was over, Vexthal found himself sitting in the station's control room with Santos, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he'd once believed in. "What happens now?" he asked. Now we fight back properly." Santos was cleaning her rifle, a habit he'd noticed among human soldiers. They maintained their weapons like sacred objects. And thanks to you, we actually have a chance. The intelligence Vexthal provided over the following months proved invaluable to the resistance. Empire battle plans, supply routes, communication, codes, information that turned the tide of dozens of battles. But his most important contribution wasn't intelligence. It was understanding. Vexthal taught human commanders how Empire officers thought, how they made decisions, how they viewed their enemies. In return, he learned something that changed him forever, what it meant to fight for others rather than yourself. The lesson came during the Battle of Proxima Station, 6 months after his defection. The resistance had finally gathered enough ships for a major offensive against one of the Empire's key military installations. Vexthal commanded a mixed fleet of human vessels and defector Empire ships, crews from a dozen different species who had chosen freedom over security. The battle should have been impossible to win. Proxima Station was heavily defended, with orbital weapons platforms and a massive garrison, but the resistance had something the Empire couldn't understand: fighters who believed in their cause. As the battle reached its climax, Vexthal received word that Empire reinforcements were arriving ahead of schedule. The resistance fleet was trapped between the station's defenses and a fresh Imperial battle group. All ships prepare to retreat, he ordered over the tactical network. Negative, Commander, came the reply from Captain Torres, one of the human ship commanders. We're not leaving without completing the mission. The mission is suicide now. We need to preserve our forces for the mission, Torres interrupted, is to destroy that station before it can launch an attack on the civilian colonies. If we run now, millions of people die. Vexthal stared at his tactical display. Torres was right. Proxima Station was preparing to launch a devastating assault on the refugee worlds. But staying to fight meant certain death for most of the resistance. Fleet. Sir. His own tactical officer, a young Zephyrian who had joined the mutiny, said quietly, Captain Torres is correct. If we follow standard Imperial doctrine and preserve our forces, we lose the war. And if we stay and fight, we lose our ships. But we save the colonies. Isn't that what we're fighting for? For a moment, Vexthal saw the situation exactly as his Imperial training had taught him. Retreat was the logical choice. Save the fleet, fight another day, win through superior strategy and resources. Then he thought about Sergeant Peterson, who had died holding a hill so civilians could escape. He thought about the human transport captains who had volunteered to risk their lives for strangers. He thought about Santos, throwing away her rifle rather than execute a defeated enemy. He thought about what it meant to fight like a human. All ships, he said into his communicator, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. We're staying. Target the station's power core. Make every shot count. The battle that followed became legend among the resistance. Outnumbered 5-1, the mixed fleet fought with a desperation and creativity that the Empire couldn't match. Ships rammed through defensive lines, fighters used kamikaze attacks to clear paths for bombers, and damaged vessels stayed in the fight long past the point where they should have retreated. Vexthal's own ship, crippled by weapons fire, made the final run on the station's reactor. As his crew evacuated to escape pods, he stayed at the controls, guiding the dying vessel toward its target. Commander, Santos's voice came over the radio from her fighter escort. You need to get out of there. The ship's too damaged. Someone needs to make sure it hits the right spot. Vex, don't do this, we need you. Vexthal smiled, the same expression he'd seen on so many human faces before they did something heroic and impossible. No, he said. You need what I learned from you. And now other people can learn it too. The explosion that destroyed Proxima Station could be seen from 3 star systems away. But the real victory wasn't the station's destruction. It was the message it sent throughout the galaxy. The Empire could be beaten. Within a year, rebellions broke out on dozens of worlds. Imperial officers began defecting in larger numbers, unable to reconcile their orders with their consciences. The war that had seemed hopeless for the resistance suddenly became winnable. At Vexthal's memorial service, held in the liberated capital of New Earth, Sergeant Maria Santos stood before representatives from 50 different species, and delivered a eulogy that would be remembered for generations. Commander Vexthal died the way he lived his final years, she said, fighting not for conquest or glory, but for the simple idea that everyone deserves the right to choose their own destiny. She paused, looking out over the crowd of former enemies who had become allies united by shared sacrifice and common purpose. He asked me once what it meant to fight like a human. I told him it meant fighting for something bigger than yourself. But he taught me something I didn't understand at the time, that fighting like a human isn't about being human at all. Santos gestured to the mixed crowd, Zephyrians, Kellists, Fortakians, and dozens of other species, all wearing the uniform of the Free Galaxy Alliance. It's about choosing to protect others even when it costs everything. It's about believing that freedom is worth any sacrifice. It's about understanding that some things are more important than victory, like ensuring that others get to live free. She looked up at the stars visible through the Memorial Hall's transparent dome. Vexthal learned that lesson better than most humans ever do. He discovered that fighting like a human means fighting like someone who believes that every person, no matter what species they are, deserves the chance to choose their own path. The memorial service ended with a moment of silence for all those who had died in the war, Imperial and Resistance alike. But their deaths had not been in vain. The galaxy they died for was finally free, and in the records of the Free Galaxy Alliance, Commander Vexithal was remembered not as a former enemy who switched sides, but as someone who learned the most human lesson of all, that true strength comes not from the power to conquer others, but from the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. The war continued for 3 more years after Proxima Station, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Empire, faced with enemies who fought like humans, for principles rather than just survival, found itself unable to maintain control over a galaxy that had learned the value of freedom. In the end, it wasn't superior technology or overwhelming numbers that won the war. It was the simple human understanding that some things are worth fighting for, and that anyone, regardless of species, can choose to fight like a human. They can choose to fight for hope,